Y por eso dije que no,
Okay, guys, I think I'm looking to form like a sort of like a cozier circle. Can we move the tables a little closer?
Bueno, la vamos a hacer. ¿Ya lo tienes agarrado?
No puede quedar ahí.
Ah, perdón.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hi guys, my name is Ana Dora and I'll be speaking about education for around 15 minutes with you guys. If you can't hear me because I speak very low, just let me know, because I sometimes need reminders. We're going to start by filling in this little sheet that some of you have, I think. Where are the rest of them? Does everyone have like a small sheet of paper? Yeah. Maybe like pass them around. Do you all have pencils? Sure. Can you also make them go around? And the idea is to fill both those questions out without consulting any of your neighbors. Okay? So let's take one more minute to start with that. And one is about the importance of education to a country's development. So I want you to rate that on a scale from 1 to 10.
Does anybody need a pencil?
Me,
Me, please. Chupi, Raymond. I'll just like pass it around.
No, there's no right answer, so just write what you think is best. So now this is open for answer. One factor has the most impact on the quality of education provided at a school. So if you could say, like, maybe the one thing that is absolutely essential, what would you say that factor is? Yeah. So first I want to hear a little bit about you. Can we maybe have a couple of people introduce themselves and mention something that you're passionate about or what brings you to GIN today? 2 or 3 people, one from each table.
I'll go.
Sure.
My name's Lily. I'm from San Francisco, and I'm really interested in the education. I went to a school in Ethiopia, and I helped them, and I taught some classes. So I'm really interested to learn more about it.
Over here.
I'm from the school, and well, I can feel I'm not listening in, but I'm and I think what's most important is hearing the initiative of different students and the way that helping the world bring people together in a certain way, and how I feel that this generation has a lot of accomplishments improving our environment and our society.
Thank you. Over here.
Okay, what do I say? What was the question?
One of you introduce yourself and maybe mention what brings you to today or something you're really passionate about.
Well, my name is Gerardo and I'm from here, Monterrey, Colegio Inglés, and I'm passionate about sports, but also think that this is really important because the world has many problems and we should like solve them together.
Thank you. And someone from this side of the room? Yeah?
My name is Diego. I am from the school in Monterrey. In issues I'm pretty passionate about sort of environmental changes and it has to do with recycling and waste. Basically focusing more on the environment.
Alright. Thank you. And so let me talk a little bit about myself. I wanted to hear a little bit about where you're from, because I wanted to start with sort of how my own high school experience has gotten me to where I am today. I was born in France actually, and I grew up here in Mexico. I attended this school since I was 3 years old, and I graduated in 2009. And when I was here at school, I sort of had 2 big things that I was thinking about. The first was that I was really concerned about issues around inequality and poverty. something that really drew my attention when I was here was that, this is a fantastic school and we're here right now, but you don't really have to go very far, even to other parts of the state of Nuevo León or even Mexico, to know that there are a lot of places that sort of have very different socioeconomic levels and sort of life opportunities. And even like just outside the school, you can see these different environments that have sort of a much lower life expectancy, much lower quality of life. Sort of that was always something that drew my attention. At the same time, while I was here, maybe 2005 to 2009, something very interesting started happening in Mexico. And those of you who live here will be familiar. We started to have this wave of sort of violence and insecurity. Between 2000 and 2012, we saw between 62,000 to 120,000 people, we don't know the exact estimates, die from the so-called drug war. And so a lot of my classmates and I, not through GIN, because we didn't have GIN back then, but through Model UN and through history classes and poli-sci classes, sort of started thinking about what makes these problems happen and what makes this sort of cycle continue. And at the same time, we have the United States sort of very close to us, and a lot of us sometimes travel to the States. And what I saw in the States was something sort of drastically different, and inevitably you sort of compare those two contexts, and you sort of wonder what makes some countries work in so many ways, politically, economically, socially, and you sort of think that once you get one thing working, all these other things follow. Whereas in other places, sort of nothing seems to work the way it should be, or we think there are so many areas for opportunity. So I started thinking about sort of these negative issues together with my classmates. At the same time, I sort of found that the kind of experience that I got at school was sort of very inspiring. I was very inspired by my teachers. I was inspired by my parents to think about these issues. I was inspired by events like GIN, like Model UN, to sort of keep thinking about these issues. And most of all, to think that what we could do was important and could have at some point sort of a very positive impact on these sorts of problems. And so I went to study abroad in the States, my undergraduate degree at Yale, and I decided to focus sort of thinking about these same issues, like what makes poverty continue and what makes inequality continue in a country. And so I wondered what kind of majors and what kind of areas of study would allow me to explore those two questions. And so I double majored in economics and political science because I thought they would give me sort of a balance between like these really hard statistical tools that will allow me to understand sort of black and white why some things happened, and then political science, which would allow me to understand sort of the institutions and the people that allowed those processes to continue. And so it was very interesting because you learn a lot of things from a book that tells you like why sort of poverty and inequality work in a country. But at the same time, I sort of thought it was very far away from the kinds of realities that we see here in Monterrey, here in San Pedro, and here in the state of Nuevo León, even without having to go to sort of other states in Mexico that have sort of astounding quality of life. And so what I sort of discovered there is that education was a very important, was one of the key factors that allowed those sorts of problems to continue, and that I wanted to work in sort of a very sustainable, way. Maybe not giving people food, or maybe giving them a roof or planting trees, which are obviously part of the solution, but sort of understanding the problem sort of very deeply and allowing people themselves to sort of figure out the best solutions to their own problems. And so that's what made me decide to come back here to Mexico to work in education policy. I'm working at an NGO called Via Educación. So does anyone know what via means in Spanish? Like a via?
Camino.
Yeah, so like a path. So it's so we work sort of in development issues through education. And we work with teachers, we work with parents, we work with students, and I do sort of evaluation of our programs. So I use very statistical tools to sort of evaluate if our programs have real impact, if what they're doing is sort of going to work 5, 10 years from now for a school environment. And something that makes VIA very different is that, there's a saying, you shouldn't give someone a fish or something. How's the saying go?
Teach them how to fish.
Okay, teach them how to fish. I would say we have to go even one step beyond that. Let's sit down with those people and figure out if they want to fish. or if they want to hunt. Because what's going to happen, you might teach them to fish and then the river will be dammed at some point later, or the river might dry out, or maybe they actually don't want fish, maybe they're vegetarian. I mean, etc. So it's just an idea. So I think that sort of education has that power to work from the very root of a problem, because you really sit down with those people and you find out sort of what they want to work on, and you sort of give them skills to go into the future. So I assume you're all interested in education because you're here today. I wanted to try a sort of a quick activity that I thought would get us thinking about sort of how complex education is. And I want you to think of sort of the many levels of education that you have. You have international education systems, and you have sort of the coordination that happens between them. Then you have coordination sort of at a national level. So you have some place like the Secretaría de Educación Pública in Mexico, and they deal with very important political forces and economic forces in terms of budget and what they can assign. And you have that sort of complex coordination at all levels. But really you have even the most complex coordination within a school environment. And so that is something we often forget. We often want to approach education sort of the way you would a business problem. Economists want to approach it sort of cost-benefit kind of analysis way. You have political scientists that want to look at it in a very different perspective. And I think we forget sort of the kind of difficulty that we find when we try to coordinate different actors around a very sort of abstract problem. So we'll do a quick activity and then we'll have a brief period of reflection, and then maybe we can talk more about what I do at work. Does that sound good? Okay, so I gave I gave like a little bag of balloons to someone. We need one of them to be filled. Yeah, just one. Okay, and what we're going to do is we have the responsibility of keeping that balloon in the air for 3 minutes. We can only hit it with our hands, and each one can only hit it once. Have you done this before in the conference already? No? Okay, I thought you would. Okay. So every one of us can only hit it once. Someone needs to be a helper. Who wants to be helping? Okay, so you have the responsibility of ensuring that everyone only hits the balloon once. The balloon cannot touch the ground or any other object. So if it touches one of the tables, we also lose as a group. I'm going to give you 2 minutes, to plan whatever strategy you might want to be using. If you need a strategy, or we can just try it out right now. So
maybe we can get in a line, to a line.
Circle, so it goes like this. Like a line. No, like a circle. 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 Aquí ya tenemos un círculo.
No, we just get like in a line.
Circle.
That idea is also good. Hey, everybody listen to that idea.
In front, like, time, and then you go to the back and the other one
have the balloon to everyone once without getting it into
Circle.
So let me repeat the instructions. The balloon has to stay in the air for 3 minutes. It can't hit the ground. It can't hit any other object. And all of you can only touch it with your hands and can only touch it once. Go like that. Circle is like...
But like hit it really high. Why don't we do 2 lines? Like divide this group in like 2 groups, like 2 sections, and then 1 section here, 1 section here.
Okay. Can we try over there?
In the grass will
I remember video for a day, and then how to teach it.
One line there, and 1 line here, and we're gonna go like this. we're all looking. If the balloon touches the ground or touches any other object, you can only hit it once, and we have two observers. And the observers raise their hands. Someone else? Diego will make sure that everyone
And you take time to hit it again.
Are you ready? Are there any questions?
We can just touch it once.
One. Everyone can only touch it once. So if I do this and then I do it, did I hit it again? Then I've already.
Podemos movernos como
English. The air is moving that
Yes,
way.
that way.
So why don't
Start
we?
over there.
tiene que ser.
Hubiéramos empezado de este lado. Chicas, son tipo 4 filas. Muy bien.
Círculo, yo dije círculo.
Círculo, para que si se va para un lado, alguien está ahí. ¿Me entiendes? Tiene que ser así, que el aire es como ahí, vamos a meter la mano. Pues no pasa nada, el que esté abajo, eso sí, ya.
So, two things. English, please. We have some speakers that don't speak Spanish, so let's speak to English, please. And number two, let's try that again.
Okay, so
Can we change the strategy?
You can definitely change your strategy. One tip I can give you is that a circle. So are you ready?
So it's just once.
Everyone can only hit it once.
Well, maybe we can, but, it goes in the air and like one random person.
Like, if you hit it, get out of the circle. And if it moves that way, we move as a circle. Try to get it that way, like, because the area is close to this.
No, yo te voy a tirar.
So I'm limiting the time to 1 minute.
¿Puedes grabar?
So let's try for 1 minute in the air. So right now we got 11 seconds. Let's do that. Yes? 1, 2, 3.
Oigan, ciérrense los que no lo han tocado.
Yo le pegué.
That was a minute.
¿Qué? Tampoco no hay nada de salida.
Lunch todas las cremas. Ponte ahí y yo me pongo.
Graba desde allá.
Let's try that one more
Yes.
No, but we already tried that, and no one moved. Like, the balloon moves that.
Why don't we make
So when the balloon moves, we just move together.
No, that's not.
No, hacemos una fila aquí y le pegamos para
Ah,
allá.
like you have on top.
Okay, yes, let's do a line. Formation.
Yes.
Okay, let's do a line. Ahora sí, that way, and the balloon will come, another one.
Okay, let's try that one more time.
So what are we gonna do? The line and we just hit it and it comes back?
No, the people from that side come this side. Like, when we hit it,
Okay, yeah.
air is not our fault.
Let's do it in the air.
Y si nomás ponemos que por favor nos más intenso y la hacemos así.
Okay, again, people should go that way. Like, be there.
A line like this, and we start getting that way, then that person moves, and the next person. Okay, no, see. Okay. Let's do a line and then just like once, like we start with a little, like small amount of people and then hit it and we go back and we just go over there and then the next one.
Okay, so where do I let the balloon go?
No,
So do a line here, a line here.
I just don't know.
And then a line in the back. And whenever you finish hitting the balloon, we end
And just go like, if you already hit it, that way because they're gonna be confused.
Okay, so where do we let the balloon go?
Okay,
Here?
wait.
One.
One.
Yo sé que puede pasar. Like, I think the problem is that we're letting the air have an effect because we're doing it too high. So if we were to get in a closer circle and we just do it a little bit and we block the air with our bodies and we like do it down here.
balloon goes off, goes there. I don't think like we're gonna.
Pero tipo hacer un círculo, make a closer circle.
Or start there and just move.
Okay, we have to do it for 1 minute.
And if we did like that,
De que todos tus grupos pudieron.
in here, like
Okay.
you said, in a close
So guys, let's try that one more time and then we'll sit down.
Okay, well, if you want to do a circle or do it like last time.
Pero no podemos de que agarrar el balón. No podemos tipo pasar de que así.
No.
O sea, pues hay que tratarlo.
Según yo hay que
Bueno, entonces que sí, pero.
Okay, what do you guys think?
Raise your hand if you want to do a small circle. Or raise your hand if you want to do it like last time.
Last time. Do a closer circle.
Okay.
no más como el tiempo.
Okay, let's start over there.
Es la metáfora. Que es
No, de que actual Okay, ya. Véalo para acá. Sí, no.
Entre más tiempo se quede en el aire, mejor. Que no le pegues, que no sabe.
estaba difícil. No, es que no hay aire. ¡Ale, pégale! No le puedo pegar. ¡Julia! ¿Por qué no se salen? ¡Ale, pégale! No le pegué. ¡Agárralo! No, sí, seguimos bien. ¿Cuánto llevamos? ¿Alguien váyale?
Slow clap. So yo teníamos que pegarle todo.
Sí, pero esperamos que estés sentados que yo. Ajá. No, yo me espero para que yo. ¿Dónde está él? Él está solo. ¿Está solo o está con ellos? No, no decimos que no. Se puede que dónde yo
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, guys, can we all take a seat facing this way? Who's facing that way? Thank you. Okay, so that took us six tries to get 1 minute. What kinds of skills did you use? Let's start with that.
Communication.
Effort.
Communication.
Responsibility.
So how did you see communication?
It was good. Well, kind of. It was good. I'd say it was good because like I don't know who said like raise your hand if you want this or raise your hand if you want that. So that was good. It was like leadership and that was good. And also it was like a democracy. Everybody talked. Everybody gave their opinions. I think it was a good thing.
Okay, over here, what did they?
The people who had ideas and wanted to share them, like said them out loud, and like as a group, my favorite one of them, which was like the one we used, but like the fact that a lot of people contributed, like sharing their ideas, is
Okay. Someone else?
There was like strategizing, which was like if we all tried to do our own thing, it's not like there wouldn't be any sort of communication or like it wouldn't be very balanced. It doesn't have like it wouldn't work.
Right. So what are some of the lessons that you learned if you had to teach another team sort of how to keep the balloon in the air for a minute on the first try? What kinds of like concrete things, sort of like actual strategies would you suggest in terms of balloons aside from like teamwork and collaboration? Go inside, okay, definitely. What else?
Hit the balloon slowly.
Balloon slowly. Okay, so that was something you definitely did. So there's a couple of other things I think you guys sort of switched as you went along. Can anyone identify another one of those?
Well, when we were in the outside. When we were outside, the air was kind of the element was blocking our way to success.
Okay.
So we started moving to get
In that direction. What else? Any other lessons over on this side? No? So did you all end up playing the same sort of role in hitting the balloon? Yeah, so I think in the first try you all wanted to hit it sort of in the same way, in the same sort of circle, right? But then you sort of switched strategies in that sense as well, right? You had some people sort of like satellites a little bit. Am I right? Yeah? Okay. Sophia? You want to share something? No. Anyone else? What?
that like something that we also learned was that it sounds a little bit weird, but like sometimes when you try to do something and like accomplish something, like it's not always easy. Like in this case alone was like blocking us from doing like as much of it like what we wanted to do. But we need to like overcome those
how the group works?
We were thinking about how to follow up on the different roles people play. Like there are some people who are very we would call type A, very organized, want to get it all. You know, somebody has to emerge to speak. Then other people have to listen. Then you have to adapt, and that you really use everyone's skills because there's thinking going on with the people who are more silent. But then you adjust, and some people did it just without saying anything. They just started running or started to position themselves differently.
So if we're thinking about education, we're thinking of this activity as a metaphor for what happens in a school. What might the balloon represent?
Well, I think it represents like a successful, maybe not the balloon itself, but like the 1 minute of keeping it in the air. The balloon, like I think it represents a successful school system in which the students come out with parents.
What else might the balloon represent? Yes? Exactly. So,
Like they're trying, like everyone is trying to keep the students safe, like from rising and from getting a higher education, and we don't want that to fall. We want them to flourish in that way.
exactly. So if we think of the balloon as a student that we need to keep in the air essentially from the moment he is born until the moment he graduates from the highest level of education that we sort of think that she should aspire to, that he or she should aspire to. What are we all in this metaphor? Here? We're teachers. What else are we?
Principals.
Parents, principals. What else?
Mentors.
Society.
Mentor, society. What else? School system.
Fellow students.
Fellow students.
School itself.
School itself. What else? The government. Exactly. It can also be sort of the learning material, the actual curriculum, right? And so what might, in this perfect day, what might the wind represent then? Maybe? Hardships. What kind of hardships?
Already, lack of funds, hardship, or like a lack of motivation from the students.
Obstacles.
Obstacles?
Like economical issues, or if there is no school in their area, in their country, like if they don't have the money to implement schools and
So infrastructure. Okay.
Socioeconomic problems.
Okay. How might socioeconomic problems push the balloon to the ground? Why do we say?
It's academic have like a certain ideas to what students might study. It depends a little how much like salary they get or how much money they have. Like, it also affects the schools to the distance as well.
Okay. Excellent. Anything else over on the back? The quiet ones? Anything else?
Many people that live in the poverty line prepare their kids to have a job and generate income for the family rather for them to get an education. Sometimes the socio-economic problem is that parents don't want their kids to go to study because they will learn because they can benefit more from them working rather than from them learning.
Exactly. So you should be an economist. We call that opportunity costs, and that's already seeing that you could be studying, but look at all the other things you could be doing and all the income you could be generating. So what else? What are the other factors that sort of push our balloon to the ground? Well, gravity. So what kinds of things does gravity represent? So even if we didn't have that wind, let's imagine we were inside, where it's much easier. But what might gravity represent in that scenario? Just a natural tendency for the balloon to fall.
Lack of motivation.
Lack of motivation. And why aren't we motivated at school?
Because well, many people they think it's boring, and that it's not necessary to have an education to have a successful life.
So we don't think it's necessarily relevant sometimes. What else?
How some people are not educated about the importance of education. People just they don't really care about this class. They don't really think it's important. They don't really see their benefits. So that's why they really don't put their best effort and really don't try hard to be able to move on.
Great. Over here, and then I'll get to you.
Lack of opportunities.
Okay, lack of opportunities. I think also like the preparation of the teachers, like not in this type of schools, but like in public schools in Mexico and other countries, like the teachers don't really have the knowledge, like enough knowledge or like disposition to like, get them to be successful. Okay, over here.
A lot of the things like that we learn are not things that are going to benefit them or going to sort of like use in their everyday life. For example, someone who studies I don't know, physics won't need to study the Mexican Revolution because it doesn't have anything to do with their study.
Excellent. And over here, last one.
Like, like also like going off, like sometimes how the teachers aren't prepared and sometimes like they don't care enough. Like I feel like this was like a perfect model of what our like government and like whole system could look like if everyone cared, because like sometimes people would just stand still and see the whole and like reach out to try to like push them.
Exactly. So I think the exercise allows us to see sort of that there's very different forces sort of acting on the balloon, right? There's gravity, there's sort of things like wind, we don't want it to hit the floor, there's going to be objects, we all have different interests, right? So right now we all have like this very common goal of keeping it in the air, but that's not always the case. And so what happens in education is imagine that, but exponentially. Like it's a crazy kind of problem, like very complex. And we can just start to think by looking at our little response sheets. What is the factor that we all circled sort of as the most important to an education? So can we raise our hands if we circled, can I see that? If we circled school infrastructure. So is that the factor that has the most impact on student learning? No one? Okay. Principals and directors? No one. Okay. Teachers? Okay, around half. Good. Curriculum design and instruction. No one. Learning environment. Okay, a couple, including some of our faculty. Socioeconomic level of students. So a couple as well. Family structure and background. So a couple as well. So why don't we have someone who spoke out in favor of teachers being sort of the most important element? So that means that everyone around the balloon, so all of the ones who are trying to hit it, are sort of essential. So why do we think they're so essential? Anyone of you?
Okay, so I think teachers are mostly what encourage students to like something or to want to go to school. For example, if I have a teacher that I hate, then I don't want to go to her class. Like I'm not motivated. I'm not motivated to learn more. The teachers are mostly what motivates students to keep on like wanting to learn. And I know like curriculum design and instruction is very important, but if the teachers don't actually implement it with their students, if teachers don't actually teach their students what they're supposed to learn, then the students are not going to learn. So teachers are also what they make the students be more literate, educated, and
Okay, excellent. So there's actually a lot of studies about how teachers are sort of super essential to the education system. So for a long time, sort of education policy focused on sort of forming more schools or sort of equipping those schools with floors and then windows and then roofs and then computers and libraries. And what, at least in Mexico, we found is that that sort of does not translate to any increase in student enrollment or in quality of teaching or learning at all over 50 years. So it's like a long lesson.
so what?
No, sort of equipping schools with like basic infrastructure if you don't invest in teachers. So think about how you've learned anything you've ever learned in your life, even things where you're learning from a book. So why are you able to learn from a book? Because someone taught you how to read, someone taught you how to sort of get all that information in your brain and sort of process it. So it's really important to sort of focus on teachers, and so we often sort of forget that. And in Mexico, it's only recently that we're thinking like, oh, look at these people. Like, shouldn't we be sort of investing in their training, like being careful about how we select them? And so that is sort of a lesson that I think we can also sort of thinking about our activity, sort of like a slow fail, sort of thinking about fast failing or slow fail. you know, it's not working, but I'm sure that it's the infrastructure. Like, I'm sure that I need to put more libraries in schools. So we keep sort of pushing money at the problem, and we don't sort of see the reality that it's actually sort of a very people-centered problem. So that's one of the issues. Who circled socioeconomic level or family structure? Someone? So someone over here who wants to speak. Why?
I choose family structure and background because I think that it's the first step to education. Like in my family, my parents wouldn't have encouraged me to go into the AAM or the school that you go to. Like you wouldn't get the education. So I think that's the first step. And if the family does not have the money, how will the kid enter the school? And then there comes the teacher, the principal, and everything else. So I think that it's like the first step.
Excellent.
I also think it's very important that your family motivates you to be better at school and to really think about the future instead of just like, oh, my kid goes to school, period. Or like, it doesn't matter, your grades don't matter. Just continue or something like that.
Okay, someone else?
I believe that the most important factor that can impact students for learning would be not the ones that are there by the government itself. Because if you look at the United States, most of the schools that are public schools in the United States are as mostly the same type of education that we receive in Mexico with private schools. So what I believe would be that the government should be the one that should implement public schools that are as high of the education, like speaking of education, as the private schools here in Mexico, because that's one of the leading issues here in Mexico, that the public schools are not well structured, they don't have the learning environment that they should and things like that. So I think that the government should be the one to be putting more attention to the school issues.
Okay. Yeah, so discussions about sort of family background and structure and socioeconomic levels are sort of very controversial because a lot of people working in education sort of think it's the wind that's blowing the balloon in one direction. And so it's such a powerful force that it sort of sometimes seems like, what can we do in the face of those odds? Sometimes we just think, well, let's move inside. Let's move inside the cafeteria and let's try that again. So that might be sort of taking maybe only students that don't have sort of those sorts of problems and working with them, which is useful, of course. We're at a school that sort of attends to those sorts of interests. But that's not a scalable solution for an entire country or for sort of a region like Latin America or even Europe, where you also have these sorts of issues. And so socioeconomic things are very interesting, and sort of I think it's important to sort of, what I've learned, I guess, in working with this is that it's important to understand that that wind is sort of very strong sometimes. And I wanted to share some statistics with you that I found sort of really astounding. Sometimes we think, well, you have a public school and you have two students, one comes from sort of a very high socioeconomic level or from a very affluent family, and he does really well and he participates a lot and he speaks out and he sort of is kind to his peers. And then we have students sort of from different socioeconomic levels that maybe don't do so well and don't speak out or are very shy or are aggressive. And we sort of think, well, that's maybe why they are where they are in that pyramid. So that's certainly what some people think. But all of the research has shown the contrary. When we are young, sort of the kind of environment that we have at home is sort of really important to how we develop sort of our brains. Everyone has heard of like the 1,000 days. The first 1,000 days of you as a baby are sort of absolutely essential to how you develop, and sort of all of your critical thinking skills and your IQ levels sort of are sometimes determined in those sort of 3 early years. So someone from sort of from an affluent family will have parents who speak to him a lot. So you've certainly had like cousins or uncles who are like, ay, bebecito, ¿cómo estás? Que mira, that kind of thing. And you're just sort of like, oh my God, he is not understanding you. Like, why are you speaking to him? Well, it turns out they're speaking to the baby for a reason. That kind of speaking, that kind of relationship with the baby is developing sort of its ability to reason, to understand its place in the world tremendously. So a kid from sort of a higher level background will have heard on average 6 times the amount of words that a student from a lower level will have heard by the time they are 3 years old. So they will have heard sort of monumentally more words, and more importantly, they will have heard sort of more praise, more like, oh, you're doing such a good job, or you're so big, or you're doing so well, than someone from a different background. And they will also have heard a different variety of words. So their vocabulary, by the time they are 5 or 7 years old, will often be richer than someone from a very different level. So I think we have to sort of keep that in mind because, like, um, because there are sort of very strong forces. Sometimes we sort of look at what's happening in our schools and we think it's a failure. Sort of the system is failing. But we maybe don't understand the context of some place like Mexico versus the US versus countries in Europe that are facing these sorts of differences. Like parents who themselves cannot read and write are already sort of at a disadvantage, and their kids are at a disadvantage as well. And it's just monumental. So if you already have those things when they enter pre-kindergarten, if they enter like something like kindergarten, how are you going to allow a school system to sort of equal those differences or allow sort of an even chance for everyone? So you can imagine balloons that sort of fall much quicker. Like imagine if they had a weight, and so it's just infinitely complex. And I think we should sort of talk about the variety of other factors. That doesn't mean there's any sort of conclusion about the little list I gave you. I certainly don't have an answer. I don't think anyone has an answer. But I'm sort of very inspired by these sorts of questions. I think they're super challenging, and I'll be working on this, I think, for the rest of my life. So I'm very passionate. And so I just wanted you to get sort of like an idea of the kind of complexity that you have when you think of a problem like this. I think we're out of time, so there's like a couple of, if you're interested more in sort of like what I'm actually doing, I have like annual reports of the NGO that I'm working with. It's an NGO founded by grads from an education school in the States, and they're working sort of around Latin America, specifically in Mexico. We work with a lot of school districts, parents, teachers, and as I said, I do sort of the evaluation part of our work. I also have cards. I can give you my email if you're interested in education. I would love to sort of hear about what you're doing. I hear you have projects or something, or sort of issues that you're organizing around, so I would love to hear that as well. And sort of encourage you all to continue in sort of the many exciting things that I'm sure you are up to.
Thank you. We're right on time. You guys can head over to the auditorium for the next